James Wilson stood outside Buckingham Palace on a hot summer day. The sun beat down on his red uniform and tall black bearskin hat. Sweat ran down his back, but his face showed nothing. At 25 years old, James was one of the youngest members of the Queen's Guard, but he was very good at his job. Being a royal guard meant standing still for hours. It meant not smiling, not talking, and not moving, no matter what happened around you. James had done this job for 3 years now. He had learned to ignore tourists who waved cameras in his face or shouted to make him laugh. Today was busier than usual. Hundreds of tourists crowded around the palace gates, many focusing their attention on James. An older woman in a flowery hat took photos of him. A young boy tried to make him smile by making funny faces. A group of Japanese tourists posed beside him for a quick selfie. Through it all, James stared straight ahead, his eyes fixed on a point in the distance. Does he ever move? A woman asked her husband loudly enough for James to hear. I think they get in trouble if they do, the man answered. Probably lose their job or something. James had heard these comments hundreds of times before. In his mind, he thought about his apartment where he would return after his shift ended at 4 p.m. He thought about the cold shower he would take and the meal he would cook. But his face remained blank, his body perfectly still. The morning passed slowly. James felt the familiar ache in his lower back from standing so long, but his training helped him manage the pain. His feet had gone numb hours ago. Experienced guards knew how to shift their weight very slightly without appearing to move at all. Around noon, a new group of tourists approached. Unlike the others who stayed at a respectful distance, this group was loud and pushing boundaries. There were 5 of them, all young men in their early 20s, wearing bright clothes and laughing too loudly. James noticed them immediately but kept his gaze forward. Dude, these guys don't move at all, said one of them, a tall man with a backward baseball cap. He held a large cup of iced coffee in his hand. It's like they're not even real people. I heard they can't react to anything, said his friend, moving closer to James. Like, nothing at all. The tall man stepped right up to James, standing just inches from his face. James could smell the coffee and the man's strong cologne. This was not unusual. Some tourists always tried to get a reaction. James remained perfectly still, staring straight ahead as he was trained to do. 10 pounds says I can make him move, the tall man said to his friends, who laughed and encouraged him. Do it, one of them called out. See if he's real. The crowd around them grew larger. Some people looked uncomfortable, sensing trouble. Others had their phones out, recording. An older British couple frowned with disapproval, but said nothing. The tall man waved his hand in front of James's face. James didn't blink. The man made faces and silly sounds. James didn't react. Finally, the man moved even closer. Last chance, toy soldier, he said with a smirk. Give us a smile. James remained still as a statue. His training was deep, his discipline complete. 3 years of standing guard had prepared him for tourists like this. What he wasn't prepared for was what happened next. The tall man pretended to trip. His arm jerked forward suddenly. The large cup of ice-cold coffee flew from his hand, splashing across James's chest, face, and shoulders. The brown liquid soaked through his bright red uniform, dripping down onto his carefully polished boots. The crowd gasped. Someone shouted. Phones recorded everything. And James Wilson, Royal Guard of Buckingham Palace, did not move a single muscle. The cold coffee dripped down James's face, soaking his uniform. The crowd fell silent for a moment, then erupted in angry shouts. How dare you? An older British woman yelled at the young man with the baseball cap. That's assault. Someone else called out. The young man who had thrown the coffee stepped back, a strange mix of pride and fear on his face. His friends were no longer laughing. Some of them began moving away, not wanting to be part of what had just happened. It was an accident, the young man said, but nobody believed him. His face had turned red, and he was backing away from the angry crowd. Through it all, James remained perfectly still. The coffee was cold and sticky on his skin. It dripped from his chin onto his chest. The smell of it filled his nose. But his eyes stayed forward, his body rigid, his face showing nothing. Inside, James felt a burning anger. 3 generations of his family had served in the military. His grandfather had fought in World War I. His father had served in Iraq. The uniform he wore was more than cloth. It was a symbol of honor and duty. And now it was stained with coffee because of a foolish prank. But his training was stronger than his anger. Royal Guards were taught to stay in position no matter what happened. Only in cases of emergency were they allowed to break their stance. A coffee attack, no matter how humiliating, was not an emergency. A palace security officer had seen what happened and rushed over. He spoke into his radio, calling for assistance. 2 police officers who had been nearby quickly arrived and approached the young man with the baseball cap. "You need to come with us, sir," one of the officers said firmly. It was just a joke, the young man protested weakly. His friends had completely disappeared now, leaving him alone. The officers led him away while he argued that it was all an accident. The crowd watched, many of them still recording with their phones. James knew that videos of the incident would soon be all over the internet. By tonight, millions of people would see what had happened. The remaining tourists looked at James with a mixture of pity and admiration. A little girl of about 7 years old approached him with her mother. "Does it hurt?" she asked, looking up at his coffee-stained face. James couldn't answer. Guards were not allowed to speak while on duty. The girl's mother gently pulled her away. "He can't talk to us, honey. He's doing his job, even though that mean man was very rude to him." "He's very brave," the little girl said. For the next 2 hours, James stood in the hot sun with coffee drying on his uniform. The liquid became sticky and uncomfortable as it dried. Flies began to buzz around him, attracted by the sweet smell. Still, he did not move. When his shift finally ended, another guard marched out to replace him. This was the only time James was allowed to move. Following the precise movements he had performed hundreds of times, he stamped his foot, turned sharply, and marched away from his post. Only when he was inside the guards' quarters, away from the public eye, did James finally let his emotions show. His hand shook as he removed his ruined hat. His jaw was tight with anger. His fellow guards gathered around him, having already heard about what happened. "You okay, Wilson?" asked his sergeant, a stern man who rarely showed concern. "Yes, sir," James replied, his voice tight. "That was well handled," the surgeon said. "Very professional." James nodded, grateful for the comment. He headed for the showers, eager to wash away the sticky coffee and the humiliation of the day. But as he walked, one of the younger guards called out to him. "Wilson, you might want to see this." The guard was holding up his phone. On the screen was a social media page showing the video of the coffee incident. It had already been viewed over 100,000 times. And the comments below the video were full of support for the stoic guard who had not flinched even when attacked. James stared at the phone, not sure how to feel. The day's humiliation had somehow become something else entirely. James sat in the guard's break room, staring at his phone. The video of the coffee attack had now been viewed millions of times. News websites were sharing the story. People were calling him the unshakable guard and Britain's finest. His face was everywhere. "You're famous now," said Thomas, another guard who had been James's friend since training. "I don't want to be famous," James replied. "I was just doing my job." His uniform hung nearby, still stained despite his best efforts to clean it. He would be issued a new one tomorrow, but the damage was done. The coffee had seeped deep into the red wool. James's phone rang. It was his mother. "James, I just saw you on the news," she said when he answered. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Mom," he said. "It was just coffee." "Your father would be so proud," she said, her voice breaking a little. James's father had died 2 years ago. Standing there like that, not moving an inch. That's what duty looks like. After speaking with his mother, James tried to get some sleep. His next shift started early in the morning. But sleep wouldn't come. The coffee incident kept playing in his mind. Not just the cold splash, but the look on the young man's face afterward. Part pride, part fear. It bothered James that someone would disrespect the uniform like that, would turn his duty into a joke. At 5:30 a.m., James's alarm went off. He got up, showered, and prepared for the day ahead. When he arrived at the guard's headquarters, his sergeant called him into the office. "Wilson, come in," the sergeant said. "Close the door." James did as he was told, wondering if he was in trouble. Had he broken a rule yesterday? Should he have done something differently? "The captain wants to see you," the sergeant said. And not just the captain. The commander of the household division himself. James felt his stomach tighten. The commander was responsible for all ceremonial duties involving the royal family. He was rarely seen by ordinary guards like James. "Did I do something wrong, sir?" James asked. "Wrong? No," the sergeant replied with a rare smile. Quite the opposite. James followed his sergeant to a part of the palace he had never been in before. They entered a large office where two men in full dress uniform waited. One was Captain Miller, head of the Queen's Guard. The other was Commander Phillips, a tall man with a chest full of medals. Both men stood when James entered. "Private Wilson," the commander said, "thank you for joining us." James stood at attention. "Sir." "At ease," the commander said. "We've asked you here because of yesterday's incident. Your conduct was exemplary. You maintained your post despite difficult circumstances." "Thank you, sir," James said. "I was just following my training." "Not everyone would have stayed so composed," Captain Miller added. "Your actions have brought honor to the Queen's Guard." The commander nodded. "The palace has received thousands of messages of support for you. And there's something else." He paused. The Queen herself saw the video. James felt his heart skip a beat. The Queen had seen him. "Her Majesty was most impressed by your discipline," the commander continued. "She has asked to personally thank you." James couldn't believe what he was hearing. "The Queen wants to meet me, sir." "Not exactly," the commander said. "Her Majesty has a different idea. Today, during your regular duty at the palace gates, she wishes to make a special appearance. She will publicly acknowledge your service." "This is highly unusual," Captain Miller explained. "The Queen rarely singles out individual guards for recognition." James stood there, unable to find words. Yesterday, he had been humiliated by a tourist throwing coffee at him. Today, he was going to be honored by the Queen. "There's one more thing," the commander said, handing James a small white envelope. "This arrived for you this morning." James opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note that read, "I am deeply sorry for my disrespectful behavior. What I did was wrong. Please accept my sincere apology." It was signed by Michael Turner, the young man who had thrown the coffee. James stared at the note, unsure how to feel. The day had barely begun, and already it was unlike any other in his life. James stood at his post outside Buckingham Palace, wearing a fresh uniform. His heart beat fast under his red coat, but his face showed nothing. Today was not a normal day. Today, the Queen would come to see him. The crowd around the palace was much bigger than usual. Word had spread about what might happen. News vans lined the street. Reporters with cameras stood ready. Everyone wanted to see the guard who had not moved when coffee was thrown at him. "That's him," people whispered, pointing at James. "That's the coffee guard." James stared straight ahead, just as he always did. The sun was bright, but not as hot as yesterday. A light breeze moved the flags on top of the palace. James had been standing for 2 hours now. His legs felt stiff, but he was used to that feeling. At exactly 11:30 a.m., a black car with small royal flags drove up to the palace gates. The crowd grew quiet. Palace staff appeared and began to make space. James kept his eyes forward, but he could see movement from the corner of his eye. Then he heard the respectful murmurs from the crowd. "It's her. The Queen. She's really coming." James had seen the Queen before, but only from a distance during big events. He had never been this close to her. He had never been singled out by her. His training told him to keep looking forward, to not acknowledge her unless directly addressed. The Queen walked slowly toward him, wearing a bright blue coat and matching hat. 2 security officers walked beside her. Behind them came the commander and Captain Miller. The crowd was completely silent now, watching in awe. The Queen stopped directly in front of James. She was shorter than he expected. For a moment, she just looked at him. Then she smiled. "Private Wilson," she said in a clear voice that everyone could hear. "I wanted to personally thank you for your exemplary service yesterday." Protocol allowed James to respond now that the Queen had directly addressed him. "Thank you, Your Majesty," he said, his voice steadied despite his racing heart. The Queen nodded. "Your conduct in the face of disrespect brought honor to your uniform and to your country. It reminded us all of the importance of duty and dignity." James felt a lump in his throat. His own grandmother had used those same words, duty and dignity, when he had first joined the Guards. She had been so proud of him. The Queen turned slightly to address the watching crowd. "This young man represents the finest traditions of service that have been hallmarks of our nation for centuries. We would all do well to follow his example." The crowd broke into applause. Cameras flashed and clicked. James remained at attention, his expression unchanged, but inside he felt a mix of pride and disbelief. The Queen had just held him up as an example to the nation. The Queen turned back to James. "Your family must be very proud," she said more quietly. "Yes, Your Majesty," James replied. With a final nod, the Queen turned and walked back toward the car. The crowd continued to applaud. As the Queen drove away, people began to cheer and call out to James. "Well done, soldier. You're a hero. Britain's finest." For the rest of his shift, James stood at his post as always, but there was something different now. The tourists who came to take pictures with him were respectful, keeping a proper distance. No one tried to make him laugh or move. They stood beside him proudly, honored to be photographed with the Queen's Guard, as people were now calling him. When his shift ended and another guard came to relieve him, James marched away as usual. But this time, the crowd applauded as he left. James kept his face straight until he was inside the palace, out of sight. Only then did he allow himself to smile. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his mother. "Just saw you with the Queen on TV. Your father would be bursting with pride. I know I am." James read the message several times. In just 2 days, his life had changed completely. What had started as one of his worst days as a guard had somehow become his best. And it wasn't over yet. That evening, James sat in his small apartment, still trying to understand everything that had happened. His phone kept ringing with calls from news reporters wanting to talk to him. He didn't answer. He wasn't sure what to say. His surgeon had told him to take the next day off. "You've earned it," he had said. But James didn't know what to do with a free day. Being a guard was his whole life. There was a knock at his door. James opened it to find Thomas, his friend from the Guards. "I brought food," Thomas said, holding up a bag of takeaway. "Figured you could use some company." They sat at James's small kitchen table, eating curry and watching the news. James was on every channel. People were talking about him, showing the video of the coffee attack, then showing the Queen speaking to him. "You're the most famous guard ever," Thomas said. "They're calling you a symbol of British dignity." James shook his head. "All I did was stand still." "That's the point," Thomas replied. "In a world where everyone reacts to everything, you didn't. People respect that." After Thomas left, James checked his email. There were messages from people all over the world. Most were kind, telling him they admired his discipline. Some shared their own stories about learning to stay calm in hard situations. One email caught his attention. It was from Michael Turner, the young man who had thrown the coffee. "Dear Private Wilson," it read, "I want to apologize again for what I did. I was showing off for my friends and made a terrible mistake. I've received death threats since the video went viral, and I've had to delete all my social media accounts. I understand if you hate me, but I want you to know I'm truly sorry." James read the email twice. He hadn't expected to hear from Michael again. He certainly hadn't expected him to mention death threats. James didn't want that. Yes, what Michael did was wrong, but he didn't deserve to have his life ruined over it. After thinking for a while, James wrote back, "I accept your apology. What you did was disrespectful, but I don't hate you. People make mistakes. It's what we do afterward that matters." The next morning, James woke up to find even more news stories about him. A popular morning TV show wanted to interview him. A children's book author wanted to write a story based on him. A toy company wanted to make a James Wilson guard figure. It was all too much. James just wanted to do his job. His phone rang. It was Captain Miller. "Wilson, how are you handling the attention?" the captain asked. "Not very well, sir," James admitted. "I'm not used to people knowing my name." The captain laughed. "Few guards are. Listen, I have a proposal for you. The palace thinks your story could help teach people about the values of the Royal Guard. Discipline, respect, tradition. They want you to meet with a few selected schools and youth groups to talk about your experience." James was surprised. "Me, sir, I'm not good at public speaking." "You don't need to be," the captain said. "Just be honest. Tell them what it means to wear the uniform. Tell them why you didn't move when that coffee hit you." James thought about it. Maybe there was a reason for all this attention. Maybe he could use it to do some good. "There's something else," the captain continued. "Michael Turner has reached out to the palace. He wants to meet with you in person to apologize." James was silent for a moment. "What do you think I should do, sir?" "That's entirely up to you, Wilson," the captain replied. "But sometimes the greatest strength is shown in forgiveness, not just in standing firm." After hanging up, James looked out his window. The sun was shining on London. People walked by, going about their day. Life went on. But for James, everything had changed, and he had a decision to make. 2 days later, James sat in a small meeting room at Buckingham Palace. He wore his regular clothes, jeans, and a blue sweater, not his guard uniform. He checked his watch. Michael Turner would arrive in 5 minutes. The palace had arranged this private meeting. A staff member would be present, but would stay in the corner of the room. James had agreed to meet Michael after much thought. He wasn't angry anymore, just curious about why Michael had done what he did. The door opened, and Michael walked in. He looked different from the loud, confident young man who had thrown the coffee. His shoulders were hunched. His face was pale. He looked like he hadn't slept well in days. "Private Wilson," he said in a quiet voice. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." James stood and offered his hand. "You can call me James." They sat across from each other at a small table. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Michael took a deep breath. "I want to apologize again," he said. "What I did was stupid and disrespectful." "Why did you do it?" James asked. It was the one question that had been bothering him. Michael looked down at his hands. "My friends dared me. We had been drinking earlier that morning. They said I wouldn't do it, and I wanted to prove them wrong." He shook his head. "It's a terrible reason. I know that." James nodded. He understood peer pressure. He had seen it in the army. "Since the video went viral, my life has been a nightmare," Michael continued. "I lost my job. People send me hate messages. Someone even posted my home address online." "I'm sorry to hear that," James said, and he meant it. "I never wanted any of that to happen to you." Michael looked surprised. "You're sorry, after what I did?" "What you did was wrong," James said, "but I don't think your life should be ruined because of one mistake." Michael's eyes filled with tears. "I've learned my lesson, believe me. I'll never disrespect anyone like that again." James thought for a moment. "Maybe we can fix this together." "What do you mean?" Michael asked. "The palace has asked me to speak to some schools about being a guard," James explained, "about discipline and respect. Maybe you could come too. Tell your side of the story. Show kids that actions have consequences, but also that you can make things right after a mistake." Michael looked stunned. "You would want me there? With you?" "I think it would make the message stronger," James said. "Much stronger than just me talking about standing still." For the first time, Michael smiled. "I would like that. I really would." That afternoon, James met with Captain Miller to share his idea. The captain listened carefully. "It's unusual," he said when James finished, "but I think it could work. The two of you together, one showing discipline, one showing remorse and growth. It's a powerful message." "So the palace will allow it?" James asked. "I'll make sure they do," the captain promised. The next week, James returned to his duties as a royal guard. Things were different now. Tourists were more respectful. They stood farther back. They didn't try to make him laugh or move. Some even saluted him. During his break, James checked his phone. There was a message from the palace education office. They had arranged the first school visit for the following month. Both James and Michael would attend. There was also a message from his mother. "Just saw you on the morning news again. They're calling you the forgiving guard now. Dad would say that's even better than being unshakable." James smiled as he put his phone away. His father had always told him that true strength wasn't about standing firm against the wind. It was about knowing when to bend. As he marched back to his post, James felt different. He was still the same guard, still doing the same job. But now he understood something new about the uniform he wore. It wasn't just about tradition and discipline. It was also about setting an example in unexpected ways. 1 month later, James stood in front of 200 students at a London school. He wore his full guard uniform, red jacket shining and black bearskin hat making him look very tall. Beside him stood Michael, dressed in a simple suit and tie. Both men looked nervous. The school hall was packed. Teachers stood at the back. Some parents had come too. A few reporters with cameras waited to write about this unusual event. "Thank you for inviting us today," James began. His voice was steady but quiet. He was not used to speaking to large groups. "I'm Private James Wilson of the Queen's Guard. Most of you have probably seen the video of me." The students nodded. Many smiled. They all knew who he was. "This is Michael Turner," James said, pointing to the young man beside him. "He's the one who threw coffee at me." The room went very quiet. Some students looked angry at Michael. Others looked curious. Michael stepped forward, his face red with shame. "What I did was wrong," Michael said clearly. "I disrespected Private Wilson, the uniform he wears, and what it stands for. I'm here today because I want to make things right." For the next 30 minutes, James and Michael took turns speaking. James explained what it meant to be a royal guard. The training, the discipline, the pride in standing for something bigger than himself. Michael talked about peer pressure, making bad choices, and living with the consequences. "When I threw that coffee, I wasn't thinking," Michael said. "I just wanted my friends to think I was funny and brave." But real bravery is what Private Wilson showed, doing his duty even when it was hard. A young girl raised her hand. "Were you angry when the coffee hit you?" she asked James. James nodded. "Yes, I was very angry inside, but my training helped me control that anger." "And are you still angry now?" the girl asked. James looked at Michael, then back at the students. "No, being angry for a long time only hurts yourself. It's better to move forward." After they finished speaking, the students clapped loudly. Many lined up to shake hands with both men. Some asked James for his autograph. Others thanked Michael for being brave enough to admit his mistake. As they left the school, a reporter approached them. "This is quite unusual," she said. "The man who was disrespected and the man who did the disrespecting working together. Whose idea was this?" "It was James's idea," Michael said quickly. "When most people would have stayed angry, he offered me a chance to make things right." The reporter wrote this down. "And what's next for both of you?" "We have 9 more schools to visit this month," James said. "After that, we'll see." That evening, James received a call from Captain Miller. "The palace is very pleased with how today went," the captain said. "The phone has been ringing all afternoon with other schools wanting you both to visit." "Both of us?" James asked, surprised. "They want Michael too." "Yes," the captain said. "Your story is stronger with both sides. It's not just about standing firm anymore. It's about forgiveness and learning from mistakes. That's a message people need to hear." After hanging up, James looked at a new text message from Michael. "Thank you again for today. My mother cried when I told her what we're doing." In a good way. James smiled. His life had changed in ways he never expected. He had joined the Queen's Guard to stand tall and be strong. He had trained to be unmoving, like a rock. Now he was traveling around, speaking to schools, helping a young man rebuild his life. The coffee incident had started as his most humiliating moment as a guard. Now it had become his most important. Not because he had stood still, but because he had learned when to move forward. 3 months passed. James and Michael had visited more than 30 schools across Britain. Their story had been in newspapers, on TV shows, and all over the internet. They had even been guests on a popular morning talk show, where they sat on a red couch and told their story once more. On a rainy Tuesday, James stood at his guard post outside Buckingham Palace. The rain soaked his uniform, but he didn't mind. Rain was better than coffee. A group of schoolchildren walked by with their teacher. They pointed at James and waved. One boy gave him a thumbs up. James kept his face straight, but inside he smiled. These children had heard him speak last week at their school. When his shift ended, James went to meet Michael at a small cafe near the palace. They often met to plan their school talks and had become unlikely friends. "I got some news today," Michael said when James sat down. "A big company called me for a job interview." "That's great," James said. "What kind of job?" "They want me to help with their school programs about making good choices," Michael explained. "They saw us on TV." James smiled. "You're good with the kids. They listen to you." Michael shook his head in wonder. 6 months ago, I was the most hated man in Britain. Now people are offering me jobs because of what happened. It doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense," James replied. "You made a mistake, but instead of hiding, you faced it. People respect that." As they drank their tea, Captain Miller called James's phone. "Wilson, are you free to come to the palace tomorrow morning?" the captain asked. "There's someone who wants to meet you and Turner." "Who is it, sir?" James asked. "The Minister of Education," the captain said. "He has an idea he wants to discuss with both of you." The next morning, James and Michael sat in an elegant room at Buckingham Palace. The Minister of Education, a serious man in a dark suit, sat across from them. "Gentlemen," the minister began, "your school visits have been very successful. Teachers report that students remember your message weeks after you leave. That's rare." "Thank you, sir," James said. Michael nodded beside him. "The government has been developing a new program about respect and good citizenship for all schools," the minister continued. "We would like you both to be the faces of this program." James and Michael looked at each other in surprise. "This would be a full-time position for at least a year," the minister explained. "You would visit schools across the country, help create videos for classrooms, and work with teachers." I don't know what to say," Michael stammered. "I'm still a royal guard," James said. "I have duties." The minister nodded. "I've already spoken with your commanders. They will release you for 1 year if you choose to accept." That evening, James walked along the Thames River, thinking about the minister's offer. The lights of London shone on the water. A year ago, his life had been simple: stand at his post, follow orders. Now he was being asked to leave his post and travel the country with the very man who had once disrespected everything his uniform stood for. His phone rang. It was his mother. "Have you decided yet?" she asked. She always seemed to know when he was facing a big decision. "Not yet," James said. "What would Dad have done?" His mother was quiet for a moment. "Your father believed that serving your country takes many forms. Sometimes it's standing guard. Sometimes it's something else." After they hung up, James watched the boats on the river. People moved around him, going home after work. None of them knew who he was without his uniform, but perhaps he could still serve, just in a different way. He texted Michael, "I'm in if you are." The reply came seconds later. "Let's do this." 1 year later, James stood outside Buckingham Palace again. He wore his red uniform and tall black hat. It felt good to be back. For the past year, he and Michael had traveled to schools all across Britain. They had spoken to thousands of children. They had made videos that played in classrooms. They had even written a children's book together called Standing Strong, Moving Forward. But now the year was over. James had returned to his duties as a royal guard. Michael had taken a full-time job with a charity that taught young people about respect and good choices. As James stood at his post, he watched the tourists taking photos. They were more respectful now. No one tried to make him laugh. No one stood too close. The coffee incident had changed how people treated the guards. A young guard named Robert stood at the post next to James. Robert had joined the Queen's Guard 6 months ago. He looked up to James and often asked him for advice. "Is it true that you're leaving?" Robert asked quietly when there were no tourists nearby. Guards weren't supposed to talk while on duty, but sometimes they broke this rule when no one could hear. "Yes," James said, keeping his face forward. "I've been offered a new position." The Royal Guard had created a new role just for James, head of public education and tradition. He would work with new guards, teaching them not just how to stand still, but how to represent the values behind the uniform. He would also continue to visit schools and speak to the public. "Will you miss standing guard?" Robert asked. James thought about it. "Yes, but I'll still wear the uniform. I'll still serve, just in a different way." As the afternoon sun began to sink lower, James noticed a familiar face in the crowd. Michael stood at the edge of the tourist area, watching. He was dressed in a neat suit, looking very different from the careless young man who had thrown coffee a year ago. When James's shift ended, he marched away from his post for the last time. After changing into regular clothes, he met Michael outside. "How did it feel?" Michael asked. "Your last day as a guard." "Strange," James admitted. "But right. Things change. People change." They walked together through St. James's Park. Children played on the grass. People fed the ducks in the pond. Life in London continued as it always had. "Did you ever think we'd end up here?" Michael asked, "when you were standing there with coffee all over your uniform." James laughed. "Never. I just wanted the day to be over." "I just wanted to disappear," Michael said. "I was sure my life was ruined." A young girl ran up to them, holding a copy of their book. "Excuse me," she said shyly. "Are you the coffee men? My teacher read us your book." James and Michael smiled at each other. "Yes, we are," James said. "Can you sign it?" the girl asked, holding out the book. As they signed their names, the girl's mother came over. "Thank you for what you're doing," she said. "My daughter talks about your story all the time. She stands up to bullies at school now. She says she's being strong like the guard." After the mother and daughter left, James and Michael continued their walk. "So what's next?" Michael asked. "My new job starts on Monday," James said. "The first class of new guards arrives for training." "Will you tell them about me?" Michael asked with a smile. Of course, James replied. You're part of the story now. As they reached the end of the park, they could see Buckingham Palace in the distance. The red uniforms of the guards were tiny spots of color against the white building. You know, Michael said, sometimes the worst moment of your life can lead to the best. James nodded. And sometimes standing still is just the beginning of moving forward. The two men, once enemies and now friends, walked on together into the busy London evening, their unusual story continuing to change lives, including their own.